retired at the ripe old age of 38 after growing his last business to $24 million in annual revenue. At the time, he really dove into macro and became a self-proclaimed macroeconomics addict. I, along with well over 200,000 others, follow George religiously on YouTube. His interviews are fantastic. He interviews all of the world's top experts. And his whiteboard presentations are best known for taking really difficult concepts and reducing them to 3 simple, fast steps. Today, George lives in Medellin, Colombia, and manages a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. And we're so grateful that he took the time out of his busy schedule to share his wealth of knowledge with us. Please welcome George Gammon.
Thank you very much. So how many of you have watched any of my YouTube videos? Oh, quite a few. Very good. I'll tell you a little bit about the backstory to that. I retired in 2012. I'd been an entrepreneur for many years. And as an entrepreneur, I went right through the GFC, the global financial crisis, relatively unscathed. I had some issues with some politicians back then, but as far as the economy, it didn't damage me too much. But a gentleman I knew, I was actually renting a property from him in Phoenix, right next to the Biltmore. He was living the perfect life. He had a great wife, a couple kids, and he did everything the way he was supposed to, financially. He had the 60-40 portfolio with the equities and the bonds, and in 2004 he started getting into real estate because that was the smart thing to do. That was the way you make money. You know, U.S. home prices never go down. And so he kept doing this and doing this and doing this because he was in the system. That's kind of how, I didn't really see it back then, but now I look back on it in retrospect, and that's really what he was doing. He was just kind of doing what everyone else thought was smart. And he was very successful as a result of that until we got to 2009. And one time I was writing out the check to who I was typically sending it to, and the property manager gal called me and says, well, no, you don't send it to that entity anymore. You send it to XYZ law firm. I said, okay, well, that's kind of weird. Why is that? She goes, oh, you didn't hear. I said, no, I didn't hear. And this gentleman, we'll call him Joe, you know, he had lost his wife, he had lost absolutely everything, and he tried to kill himself. And it's a sad story, but I think it really drives home the point that, especially in today's economic environment, you've got to get outside of the box. If you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're going to have problems. And in my YouTube videos, or whenever I do presentations like this, I always tell people, you've got 2 choices. You can either you know, be prepared, or you're going to be a victim. And I hate to be doom and gloom, but we live in unprecedented times, not just from you know, our liberties and personal freedom, but from a standpoint of the global economy and the global monetary system as well. And it's nothing to lose sleep over, but you've got to be cognizant of this. You can't just whistle past the graveyard and just assume that, you know, ignorance is bliss type of thing. But you are all taking the first step by being here. So fast forward 2012 when I retired, I knew that I needed to manage my own money. I needed to understand investing. I knew nothing about economics. I didn't know what a yield curve was. I didn't know what the Fed was, the bond market, absolutely no clue. But because of what happened, you know, it's still in the back of my head. What happened to Joe, I knew that I needed to do something. I couldn't just go to the local financial planner and expect that I'd be okay, because I knew that since that time, they had only put a Band-Aid over the true problem. They started quantitative easing 1. Any of you heard of quantitative easing? Okay, fantastic. So they did all of these extraordinary measures, and I knew that in the back of my head that there's no free lunch. At some point in time, we're going to have to pay the fiddler. And you cannot consume without producing. We can't consume as a result of green pieces of paper. Someone's got to produce the goods and services. That's the core of the economy. So anyway, I knew I had to do something different. So I started studying people like Milton Friedman. I just came across him, in fact, on YouTube when I was in Singapore, in the Marina Bay Sands. And everything that he said just resonated. I'm like, this guy, I was listening to the Free to Choose series they did back in the 1970s. And man, I was like, this is exactly what's been in my head my entire life. I just didn't know how to articulate it. And then from Milton Friedman, I started studying a gentleman by the name of Thomas Sowell, who is now by far my favorite economist. And then I started getting into investors like Jim Rogers, Peter Schiff, Jim Rickards, if you've ever heard those names. Guys who understand what's going on, but are kind of outside of the mainstream, outside of the system. I was always really drawn towards that. And Jim Rogers, he always likes to keep it simple. He says, listen, I just buy low, sell high. That's it. And he is one of the most well-known investors of all time. So I thought to myself, okay, I want to be like Jim Rogers. That's what I would do when I grow up. So I was looking at charts back then, excuse me. I saw a chart of the U.S. housing market going back to 1900 adjusted for inflation. And if you guys recall, 2012 was pretty much the bottom of the market. And I saw that things, or real estate back then, was quote unquote cheap. So I looked at a chart of Japan. I saw their housing market going back to 1990, and it just gone down, 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 down the whole time. But it bottomed out from peak to trough about 60%. And at the time we were about 50. Now at that time I was telling my family members and my friends, I'm like, okay, well I'm thinking about getting into real estate. And it sounds like a great idea now, but back then, they're like, you've got to be kidding me. That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard of in my life. To the point where they're almost having like an AA intervention, right? Where George, you got to sit down. You're about to make a huge mistake. And I've noticed in my life that whenever I've mentioned an investment that I'm thinking about, and I get that reaction from my friends and family member, that's where I make all the money. When I lose money is when I tell them about an investment. They say, that's a great idea. How can I do that as well? Let's partner up. That's where I always get my butt handed to me. So I went in real estate 2012. I learned it here, and I started doing it overseas. And in 2015, I started investing quite heavily in Colombia, Medellin, Colombia. And most of you probably know it from Narcos or Pablo Escobar or cocaine or something like that. And that's the exact response I got from my family. They said, no, don't go there. You're going to get kidnapped. You're going to get beheaded. You're going to this and this and this and this. And sure enough, of course, that's where you make all the money. And in 2019, I had retired, but once you're an entrepreneur, you kind of never lose that energy or that focus, or just your mind's always going. So I thought, well, we're doing all of these houses or these apartments here, these properties, and I know these TV shows are super popular in the United States, the is it HGTV, I think it is. So I thought, well, why wouldn't that be popular here in Medellin? So you got to keep in mind, I don't speak Spanish. I'm not a part of their culture. I've never produced a TV show in my life, ever. I don't know the first thing about it. But I went to the local TV station and I pitched them on it. I said, it's going to be fantastic, and trust me, like a Trump moment, And they said, well, okay, we know it's popular. Why don't you bring us, a demo reel in a couple weeks? Anyway, I did it. I hired all the editors. I hired the camera people. I figured it out. The show was a big success. We did one season, 13 episodes. And at the end of that season, this was 2019, I thought, well, we're going to go into a season 2, but we got to take a little bit of a break. And I've got all these awesome camera people and editors. I don't want to lose them, so I need to do something to keep them busy. I'll just start a YouTube channel. And that's how we got to where we are today. I never thought it would be something like this. It was just about real estate at the beginning, but my passion is macroeconomics, which I'm sure most of you will be able to tell, or you can tell by watching my videos. And sure enough, those were the videos that did extremely well. So it was a perfect fit. But about 2 months ago, I did a video on the World Economic Forum, something they're calling the Great Reset. Have you guys heard about this?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'll be going over this momentarily. It's kind of the thrust of the presentation today. But I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, my good friend Lynette Zhang was the first person that said, hey George, you got to take a look at this. And I dove into it, and I was just doing research straight from their website. I wasn't like creating any videos or fabricating anything or just reading something on some third-party site. It was directly from their website and from their YouTube channel. So I did this video on it, and it was very popular. And maybe a month ago, something like that, someone direct messaged me on Twitter, and they said, hey, did you know that the BBC just did a hit piece on you? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And so I checked it out, and sure enough, the piece that the BBC did was something called misinformation on YouTube or the internet. And they used one of my videos as an example of this misinformation and how you really need to watch out, because nowadays there's these people on YouTube that'll try to brainwash you into believing that personal liberty is bad, that free market capitalism is good, and that we need, they call it neoliberalism. And they create all these buzzwords to make capitalism sound bad or personal freedom. And so the thrust of their hit piece was basically we know that we're no more sophisticated now. We realize that these concepts of free market capitalism and personal liberty are outdated. And we don't want, we need more equal outcomes. We don't need equal opportunity, something I'll get into in just a moment. And this is an example of what not to watch on YouTube, because you can go down that rabbit hole, and these guys like George Gammon are going to brainwash you into thinking that freedom is good. But of course, what do you think the video they used as an example on the BBC hit piece? It was the video I did on the Great Reset. So you start thinking about this and kind of connecting the dots, and you're like, okay, well, who funds the BBC? Is it the people that go to this World Economic Forum, or do they have a poll there? And you start scratching your head, and you're like, wait a minute, there might be something to this. So let's go in. Today what I want to do is I want to go into what the Great Reset is, who these people are, and what could potentially be motivating their decision-making process and these agendas that they've come up with. That, again, it's not me making this up. It's not me calling it the Great Reset just to sensationalize it to get clicks on YouTube or whatever. It's straight from their website. These are their words, not mine. And you'll see this with a couple of clips that I'm about ready to show you. Yeah?
Have you seen Michael Matt's little video about the Great Reset?
I have not.
There's a Catholic newspaper called The Remnant, and he does a really great video on the Great Reset. You have to watch it sometime. It's on YouTube.
Okay, well, let's go through this, and I'm going to take you guys through kind of my thought process as to how I do a whiteboard video. And I just kind of throw everything up against a wall and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together and just see what works out and what type of message is really resonating with me, and that's what I try to relay to the audience. So let's kind of go through that thought process tonight. And you'll have to forgive me because I'm going to go back and forth between this slide presentation and some video clips. So I did not check the audio. Let's do that right now. So we talked about the World Economic Forum. This is the group that is, they're the global elite of the global elite. And it's headed by this guy named Klaus Schwab, who, have any of you ever watched a James Bond movie? Especially the old school ones, it's like Sean Connery and whatnot. They had a group in there called Spectre. And Spectre were the bad guys, and it's this bald guy, and Austin Powers ripped it off, and Mr. Evil had Mr. Bigglesworth. Right. So I'm going to play a clip of Klaus Schwab, and you tell me if he reminds you of a James Bond villain. And I'm not editing this. This is exactly how the guy sounds. But this is the intro to their Great Reset, and this is from their YouTube channel. Let's see if we can get the audio.
To get us underway, let's hear from the forum's executive.
Let's see. That's not going to work. Let me see if I can just put this up tonight. How did you get this on?
You just hold it.
Wait, hold it. Wait, hold select. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's do that. Okay. So let's see.
I think it's the proximity to the other mic.
Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe I should use this.
Try standing the other one up, maybe.
This one.
Chairman, founder, Professor Klaus Schwab.
You guys hear that?
Exactly right.
Okay. Well, let's see here.
Maybe it's the mic.
Might just be the mic, huh?
Must be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to turn this thing off. No, it's not opening. Maybe I can just pull this up. Let's see if that'll work.
To get us underway, let's hear from the forum's executive chairman and founder, Professor Klaus Schwab.
Thank you, Adrian. It is obvious that we are in the midst of the most severe crisis the world has experienced since World War II. 75 years ago, countries and people came together to shape the post-war global order, which brought us decades of peace, increased global cooperation and prosperity to hundreds of millions of people around the world. The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight the real virus, but to shape the system for the need for the post-corona era. In short, we need a great reset.
James Bond? Spectre? So, what is their great reset when he's talking about that? The one thing I want to highlight about what he said, first and foremost, is he's talking about the coronavirus, what we're dealing with. And here's a direct quote from their website, actually one of his blog posts, where he's talking about the pandemic. You see, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity. And he uses that word constantly. He sees this as an opportunity to completely reshape the global economy and the monetary system. And we'll get into that in just a moment. And the Great Reset, I know you guys probably can't see this. Let me blow it up as big as I can. So this is on their website. If you just Google Great Reset, this will come up if you're doing this at home. But the main thrust of it is it's kind of got these pillars, if you will. So it's, and what's weird about this is they're just these generic platitudes that really don't mean anything. Things like shaping the economic recovery. Well, okay. So you ask yourself, well, how do you shape the economic recovery? This is this opportunity. And he talks about gender parity. Okay, well, that's good, but I don't like it when you're forcing this upon a society. It can't be a bottoms or a tops down type approach. It needs to be bottoms up. And then it starts getting really weird where they start talking about the, I always get this one wrong because they add a letter to it every month, so the LGBTI inclusion. So that's somehow going to help the economy. Now, whether you're for that or not, neither here nor there, but I don't know how that's going to really help us get out of this COVID crisis. If you go down to the local coffee shop that had to shut their doors because they completely ran out of money because the government forced them to shut down. The government forced the people to stay in their homes. I don't know how more LGBTI inclusion is going to help that store owner. They're out of business, and all those jobs are gone. And we go further over to the right here, where they start talking about harnessing this fourth industrial revolution, which sounds great, but you say, okay, well, what's the fourth industrial revolution? And that's where we get into things where we're running the economy with drones. And I don't know if you've heard their agenda, where their vision for 2030 is that none of us own anything, and that we all rent everything. And right on their website, I mean, it just gets creepier and creepier and creepier. They had a video that I put out on Twitter the other day where they said that by 2030, you will, and they're talking directly to us, they say you will own nothing, but you'll be happy. Those are their words. So then you got to ask yourself, okay, well, if I don't own anything, none of us own anything, then who owns what I rent? And then you go down the rabbit hole and you find out, oh, okay, so it's the global elite that think that we're just too stupid to understand how to recover from this COVID or whatever you want to call it. And then it gets into a digital identity. And this is, you can't really see it, but this is on the right here. And then you go from a digital identity to them having governance of the internet. See? So you start to understand their vision a little bit more clear, and it starts to become a vision that I want nothing to do with. And I think most people in this room want nothing to do with. Where I really draw the line is when I read things, and this is from Klaus's blog, and this article, I'm just going to read bits and pieces of it. This has that diagram on it. And you'll notice that the words they use. So we start off, the Great Reset agenda would have three main components. The first would steer the market towards fairer outcomes. See, again, it's this idea that the central planners can take this tops-down approach to steer all of us, to steer our decision-making process. And the result would be fairer outcomes, right? It's not equal opportunity, but it's equal outcome. So they want everyone crossing the finish line at the exact same time. That's a big, big problem. Because although that sounds great, when you think about what would be required to make us all cross the finish line at the same time, that would be an absolute 1984 police state. So why is that? Because we're so different as human beings. We all have different skill sets. You know, my parents were divorced when I was 7 years old. That was a check against me. That wasn't too great. But I'm 6'4", so that helps me out a lot. Well, I got scoliosis. Okay, well, how do you measure that, right? Where should I start to make sure that I'm crossing the finish line at the same time as someone else? See, there's no way to do it without just pure authoritarianism and without just a ruler and all of us being a serf. That's really what it boils down to. And you'll see in the next paragraph here, government should implement long overdue reforms. Again, this tops down, like the government, the central planners can solve everything. We can't solve anything by ourselves. Let's see, to promote more equitable outcomes. Now, I can keep reading where he uses this word over and over and over again. Okay, so now, let's see, let me exit out of this. And have any of you guys heard of Jordan Peterson? Okay, fantastic. And one of his friends is a gentleman by the name of Brett Weinstein. And ironically, Brett's really on the left. But he's a smart guy. And when it comes to things like fairer outcomes or equal opportunity or equal results, he's got some incredible insights. So I want to listen to this clip because it's not just George saying that if we shoot for equal outcomes, we're going to have big problems. anyone who has studied this stuff and studied history know that this is the case.
What's his name again, please?
His name is Brett Weinstein. Yeah, and this is a clip that I had my editors do of him on the Joe Rogan show.
The quality of outcome, it's impossible. If you pursue it, you end up with a dystopia. And even if it were possible, it would not be desirable for the reasons you point to about the benefits of what you're calling competition. And I would want to tear competition into a couple different values. There's true competition against yourself. You know, you're skiing down the slope and you're paying attention to how you're doing and you're trying to do it better than you've done it before, right? There's competition against others. And the thing that unites those two things is that what you are trying to accomplish is real. It is the world telling you how successful you are at something directly, rather than through some sort of social channel, some sort of reward handed to you or some compliment given to you by somebody. And there's a tremendous danger in a socially mediated world in which those who are successful because some social thing has told them that they are correct. Because you can be dead wrong, seem correct, and move ahead in a social world, whereas if you're doing carpentry, if you're in some sort of competition, the nature of the beast is one that will tell you when you've got it wrong, and therefore it will allow you to actually improve your insight in whatever form you have it. So I'm a tremendous fan of the idea that even if your world is largely socially mediated, you have to make sure that some part of it isn't. And you are confronting something real enough to tell you you're confused so that you can learn how not to be confused.
But there are people in this world that do want to push towards an equality of outcome.
Yes.
And they make it sound as if this is not just logical, but ethical and possible in the future. And that you are on the wrong side of history if you think that capitalism and competition and all these things you just talked about are good. And that really the best thing is to force people to become some sort of utopian creature that works together in unison, and everybody is egalitarian, and there's no need for feminism and men's rights activists because everybody looks at everyone as an equal.
Well, there are two kinds of people who will advocate for equality of outcome. One kind of person who will is confused. They don't understand what happens if you go down this road. And the other one is cynical, and they're using this as an excuse to justify something that just so happens to reward them.
You hear what he said at the end there? They use this as an excuse to justify something that rewards them. And we're going to get to that in just a minute, because I think personally that's where this is going, and that's the motivation behind all of these agendas. So I think the question then becomes, what do we want to strive for? I just want to get off on a tangent for a moment here, because they're talking about rebuilding the economy, and they're talking about this tops-down approach, and we need to steer people to do certain things that we want them to do. But whenever I've talked to people, and whenever I do my videos, I try to read the comments, it seems people are very confused as to what makes a society rich. Because there's a lot of moving parts, and obviously it's a complex world. So does anyone have an idea as to what makes a society rich? Anyone have a guess? What do you think?
Trade and adding value.
You're getting close.
In the engagement.
Yeah, very, very close.
Your neighbor.
Competition.
That's right. So, yes, sir?
Economic freedom and rooted in profitability.
These are all things that are components of it. But at its core, what makes a society rich is the ability to create goods and services. The ability to create goods and services in a free market system with rule of law that doesn't change, with sound money, that you don't have to worry about it hyperinflating or going up and down all the time. You've got consistency, just like a baseball game. You know the rules, and you know they're never going to change. So you can create this game plan based on that. And let's go back to the creating goods and services. And a lot of people see the economy as doing better if we just have more money. And that's not the way to look at this. And we hear that narrative so often now when we're looking at quantitative easing or stimulus checks or universal basic income. I think the easiest way to look at it is if you just think about yourself stranded on a desert island, and you've got this giant chest full of money. You've got $1 billion in this chest, but the only thing you have on your island is a couple coconuts, some sand, and some salt water. You know, how rich are you? You're not rich at all, because there's no goods and services. You see, so what we need to focus on is how do we create more goods and services? Well, we do that with people like us, right here in the room, entrepreneurs, pursuing their own self-interest, doing the things that you guys just talked about, a free market system where we have the ability to do that. We have private property rights. So you want to unleash the human potential in every single one of us. And if you look at a very simple economy, let's say one that just produces cows, corn, and cotton. If you're producing more and more cows, corn, and cotton, that means that fewer people have to do those things in order to provide for their family. If fewer people have to grow those things, then it frees them up to do other things, like be a teacher, be a doctor, be an engineer, be a construction worker. You see, and the more efficient those people get, the more it allows a greater percentage of the population to go out and create other things that make our lives better. So whenever you're hearing this top-down type of language, like we're hearing from Klaus, or a lot of the political parties that we have right here in the United States, that they're the solution. Well, what we need is strong institutions to come in. No, you can't create more cows. The Fed can't create more cotton, can't create more corn. Only we can, the individuals in the economy. So I want to make sure that we understand that framework before moving forward. So we've talked about the Great Reset, and this is really kind of an economic thing that they want to try to institute, this agenda. But there's also a monetary component of it. And the IMF, started talking about this very recently in something they're calling the new Bretton Woods, or Bretton Woods 2.0. Have any of you guys heard about this? Okay, well, first of all, let's start with the original Bretton Woods. That was 1944, and this was right after World War II. We needed a new monetary system for the entire globe, because what ended up happening is even prior to the war, or the United States getting involved with the war, we were supplying everyone with all the guns and the bombs and the planes and everything else. So since we were the global supplier of all these things required to fight the war, all the gold, because we're back on the gold standard, that all came to the United States. So at the end of World War II, the United States had 70% of the gold. So if we wanted to stand this gold standard, there's no way we could have done it any other way than by coming together at Bretton Woods, the 44 countries, and deciding, okay, well, the United States has all the gold, so we're going to peg the dollar to gold, and then we're going to peg all of our currencies to the dollar. And that's this new Bretton Woods, or that's the old Bretton Woods system. But what's interesting is Keynes was alive back then, and Keynes was at Bretton Woods. And he was adamantly against one country having the global reserve currency, because he saw something coming down the pipe, or in the future, called Triffin's paradox. And Triffin's paradox is interesting, because what it suggests is that the country, let's use the United States as an example, that has the global reserve currency will not only have to produce enough currency to run at its highest potential domestically, but it will also have to provide those currency units for the entire globe. Okay, so then the next question becomes, okay, well, how does the United States provide those dollars needed so the global economy is functioning at 100%? Well, what we have to do is we have to run trade deficits. I'm sure you guys have heard the trade deficit is this, or the trade deficit is that. And they always talk about how that's a negative. Right now we're at all-time high trade deficits, believe it or not. So what that means is that we are importing more goods than we are exporting. Okay? If we're importing more goods, then that means we're exporting, the balance or the delta is dollars that we're exporting. So we're just trading goods for these green pieces of paper. All right, so that's a trade deficit. That's the main way that you can get dollars outside of the system. Well, what does that do to your manufacturing base?
Kills it.
That's right. It completely hollows out manufacturing. So you get to a point where you've got this country where their main export is just pieces of paper, and they can't bring any of that manufacturing back home because there's no more factories. There's no more industry. All we are is just consumers. See, and Keynes, to his credit, saw this coming. So he said, okay, well, we don't want to do that. What we need to do is we need to have a global currency that's outside of the reach of any country. So this was the genesis of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, and something called the SDR. If any of you heard Rickards talk all the time, he's always talking about SDR, special drawing rights. This is the fiat currency of the IMF. And why this is important and why this story is important is because it takes us up to today where the IMF is now calling for a new Bretton Woods, a new monetary system, a new global monetary system. So how do they envision this new global monetary system playing out? Well, of course, at the very center of it is the SDR. And then they want to encourage central banks around the world to adopt something called a central bank digital currency. Okay, have you guys heard about this?
Yes.
All right. No, it's not just Bitcoin. Now, a lot of people think that, well, this is no big deal, George. This is kind of a nothing burger because the dollar is already digital. I mean, who carries around these pieces of paper? It's all on a card or an ATM. It's already digital. What they don't understand is the big difference is every single person in this room would have a bank account at the Federal Reserve. You see? So what would happen is the Federal Reserve / government would have your bank statements. They would see every single transaction that you are doing in real time. That's a lot of data. But you can really manipulate the system. Because if they don't want you spending money on something, let's say a diesel truck, because it's not environmentally friendly, well, boom, you can't spend any money on that, and they could control that because your account is with them. Then they could monitor every single transaction, and this gets us to where we've got all this data coming into where they could continue to micromanage the economy because of all of the information that they have. Okay. And where I think this is going is all these people, you can tell by their language and these clips that I'm playing, they all are under the opinion that the economy and the globe needs to be run by the global elite, the central planners. We are way too stupid to understand what needs to happen. We need to delegate our thinking to these intellectuals that really know how to run the show. That's their mindset, right? So that takes you straight to communism, because that's the ultimate central planning type of economy. But these people aren't stupid. So if you go back to communist Russia and you ask yourself why it failed, right? The main reason it failed, there were several, but the main reason is because there weren't any price signals, right? So what that means is if you've got a lumber manufacturer that's producing 2x4s, here in the United States, or where we have price signals, if the price goes up in Dallas, then they know to send more 2x4s to Dallas. And if the price is going down, then they know that they don't send as much supply there. So it helps us allocate scarce resources with alternative uses very efficiently. But if you don't have price signals, you don't know, you waste your resources. And that's why Russia collapsed. That's why they had famine. That's why they were one of the richest countries in terms of resources, and it just completely imploded. But I think that the people at the IMF and the World Economic Forum, they understand that, so this is their elegant solution. And the way I came to this conclusion, and again, there are no certainties, there's just probabilities. I'm just trying to think through what I would do if I was in their position. If I had this belief system, this is exactly what I'd do. Everyone has an account with the Fed, you collect all the data, then you bring artificial intelligence into the Fed, and you allow the artificial intelligence to tell us where we should allocate those scarce resources. And they think that's going to do it far more efficiently than any group of human beings could. Then, of course, none of us own anything. We rent everything. So you rent it from the Fed, you rent it from the government, and they control everything through artificial intelligence. And I think that's how they believe we can get to this socialist utopia, the next stage of human evolution. Okay? Now, so you may say, George, well, that sounds like crazy talk. And let's go to a clip of our favorite banker, Jerome Powell. And this is a recent panel that he had that was hosted by none other than the IMF.
We have an obligation to stay on the forefront of policy and technological innovation and developments as regards payments, cross-border payments, CBDC, all of those things. We do think it's more important to get it right than to be the first. And getting it right means that we not only look at the potential benefits of a CBDC, but also the potential risks and also recognize the important trade-offs that have to be thought through carefully. We have a responsibility both to the U.S. and to the world that any steps taken for a U.S. digital currency be taken safely.
So this is already in the mainstream narrative. This isn't like tinfoil hat stuff. This isn't some crazy guy named George Gammon on a YouTube channel just spouting off because he's trying to brainwash you. They're talking about this. All you have to do is just pay attention to it, right? And I'm just going to keep going on. I'm going to open up the questions as soon as I get done here, if you don't mind. Okay, and I went through some of these slides here. Let's go back. Let's see. Okay, so now we're talking about the SDR being at the core of the global economy. But how do they see this in their minds? I mean, is it just another central bank digital currency? And I want to point out that it's much more extensive than that. They see the SDR as a currency unit for the entire globe, not just a reserve currency that 70% of the globe operates on right now, like the dollar. They see this as 100% of what we would use. So the bonds would be denominated in SDRs. You go down to Starbucks and you would buy your Starbucks coffee in an SDR. And then let's take this back a moment to the United States relationship with Triffin's paradox, right? That we have to create more currency units than we need because we've got to facilitate global trade, which in a way benefits the United States, right? These foreigners are producing our goods at a cheaper price. They're buying our debt. That keeps interest rates down. There is a benefit to this. It's not all cost. So you've got this benefit from global trade. So the United States and these other countries they're incentivized to want to help each other to a certain degree. But what would be the incentive structure for the IMF? Right? Why would they want to create more or less SDRs for any given country? And exactly, the only reason is it goes back to control. It goes back to power. There's no economic motivation for them to do so. And this is just backing up what I'm saying. This is from the IMF's website. And they're talking about how they have suggested that any ambitious reform of the SDR should embrace the private use of this global currency. This could include using SDRs to denominate private and government bonds, or as a unit of account in commercial transactions. And then they take dead aim at things such as Bitcoin, because they're calling this the crypto SDR. This would certainly be preferable to existing crypto assets, all of which have experienced highly volatile prices, i.e. Bitcoin. You see, so why don't they like Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is completely outside of the system. Remember, it goes back to Joe. Joe got caught up in the system. And if you do that, when our economy is so flawed from a structural standpoint, at some point in time, it's not going to end well. And Bitcoin, gold, silver are the only things we have right now that are completely outside of the system. There's no counterparty risk, and it's payment in and of itself. You know, dollar isn't payment in and of itself. It's just a claim. It's an IOU, basically. But gold, silver, Bitcoin. So that's why I think they're taking dead aim at Bitcoin. Let's go back to what their motivation may be. And this was kind of my thought process. And to do so, I want to go to a clip of Jordan Peterson. And to frame this, what we've got so far is the World Economic Forum trying to steer the economy in the way they see fit to try to create outcomes that are equal instead of equal opportunity. And then we have the IMF in collaboration with the World Economic Forum trying to create this new monetary system that is completely centralized, and these people are the only people that control it. Okay? And by the way, the people at the IMF are not elected. They're not elected by citizens. They're elected by bureaucrats themselves. So this is a clip from Jordan Peterson that I think, especially toward the end, starts to shed light on what their motivation could be. Because you sit back and look at this and say, are these people just malicious? Like, are they crazy? Are they truly Dr. Evil? Are they misguided? Are they, you know, what is driving these agendas? And I think he starts to hit on it here.
Equality, equity, that's worse, right? Equity means quality of outcome. It means that every single organization has 50% women and 50% men. Doesn't matter whether the men and women differ in their intrinsic preferences, which, by the way, they do. The scientific literature on that is completely clear. It was established by the early 90s. It was established in the Scandinavian countries, where they've done most to flatten out the socioeconomic differential, say, between men and women. Didn't get rid of the differences between men and women. In fact, they became exaggerated. The biggest personality differences in the world between men and women are in Scandinavia, just as the biggest differences in interest between men and women are in Scandinavia. Because when you get rid of the sociocultural differences between men and women, the biological differences don't disappear, they maximize. How else could it be? And as I said, the literature on that is clear, and the way that the postmodernist radicals react to that is by criticizing the scientific method itself. On their computers, which only work, of course, because the scientific method actually works. So, you hear the egalitarian clarion call everywhere. Everything should be equal. Everything should be equally distributed. We should strive for equity. It's like wrong, especially if you're a conservative. Wrong. What we want are just hierarchies of competence. Not everyone's a neurosurgeon. You know, if your father has a brain tumor, you probably want a hierarchy of competence for neurosurgeons, so you can pick the one that's the best, so that he might not die. That's what a hierarchy of competence is for. For the postmodernists, there's no hierarchy that isn't based on power. Well, because they think the world runs on power. And that's why they're willing to use power to get what they want, because it's the only thing they believe in.
So how I see this is just putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. You've got people that have an insatiable lust for power. In addition to that, they're going to want to try to improve their financial position because that gives them more power. So this takes me to something called the Cantillon effect. So have any of you heard the Cantillon effect? That theory? Okay. What this is basically a theory that states that when money is printed by a central bank or by a government, it's not just taken out on Ben Bernanke's helicopter and dropped equally to every single citizen. Right? It goes through the people who are closest to the Fed. It goes through the political insiders. It goes through the financial insiders, like the big banks. Great example of that in 2008 when they all got bailed out. So all of this newly printed money goes through the pockets of these individuals at the IMF, the people that deal in favors. They don't deal in free market capitalism. All these people at the World Economic Forum, all the political insiders and the financial insiders. So if you think about this agenda that they have, and you see these things that quite obviously would destroy the economy, would create less economic output, if we're defining that by just more and more goods and services being created. And you say, well, okay, why would they do that? Because they know that if the economy goes down, what is the central bank going to do? They're going to print more money. As an example, this year alone, the deficit spending of the United States will reach almost $5 trillion. $5 trillion just this year. To put that into context, from 1776 to 1996, the first 220 years of our country's existence, we racked up $5 trillion in debt. So we will tack on the same amount of debt just this year that it took us 220 years to accumulate, right? And how is that debt, how can we sell those bonds? Well, we can't. The only people, or the only entity that's willing to buy those things is the Fed. And how do they buy them? By printing up new money. And so the Fed's balance sheet, or how much money they've printed, just this year has gone up by $3 trillion. $3 trillion. And whose pockets does that go through first? Klaus. It goes through Klaus's pocket first. So not only do you have these people in power that have an insatiable lust for that power, but you also have something called the Cantillon effect. So they are incentivized to crush the economy, because the worse the economy gets, the richer they get and the more power they have. So I'm not saying that this is the end game or this is their game plan. I'm just saying that if you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, this has to be something that you consider.
I'm thinking of Elon Musk and Skywire, and the national debt being increased so far that it's impossible to pay back. I'm wondering if this is all pieced together in the sense that they know this is going to happen. There's going to be a total collapse or transformation in the economy. All the debts are going to be called. Interest rates are going to be going so high that nobody can afford to borrow anything. Skywire is going to connect the entire world so that even the little villages in Uganda will be tied into the economic cryptocurrency that we're all under. And we just went through the cashless problem, we're running out of coins,
Right.
I anticipate maybe 3 years.
Well, I'm not sure of a time frame, but what I would highlight with what you just said is that's more centralized power, not less.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand is there's an inverse relationship between power being centralized and the ethics, morals, and the level of greed, let's say, the character of the people who are seeking those positions of power. See, that's what people really don't understand. When you look at the Bretton Woods 2.0, or you look at the Great Reset, or you look at these lockdowns with COVID, a lot of people would argue, well, this is necessary. It's a health issue. Okay? But what they're not considering is this is consolidating more power. Think about 9/11 and all the power that was consolidated into the government just by that occurring. And that was nothing compared to what the overreach of the government that we've had over the last few months. You see, and my point with this is that the more power the government has, the more crazy the individual is that's going to seek that power. And it sounds kind of funny to say that, but think what it takes to be a good politician, or one of these people, right? You have to be a fantastic liar. That's right. You have to have no ethics. You have to have no principles. You have to be willing to say whatever is required to win the vote. right? So if this is the type of people that's drawn to this, the more power you give the government, the more unethical, the more crazy, the more likely you are to get the next Stalin, to get the next Mao, to get the next Hitler, or to get the next Mussolini. So, and I really want to impose that, and I try to do that through my videos, that guys, you may see a short-term benefit of doing a lockdown for COVID, and that may be true, but you've got to understand that takes us that one step closer to Joseph Stalin running our country.
Well, this is so obvious, but it is so hidden. You know, media, the normal person, they're freaking out because we're, not in lockdown. And all power to the glorious future we have because the government's taking care of us. How do you counteract something like that?
I think the only thing we can do is try to organize locally, like you guys are doing. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy doing my YouTube channel. And it's just really taken off, and I'm able to reach a lot of people and hopefully open their eyes as to what happens when they start giving up their personal liberties, and how that's a slippery slope that you do not want to go down. And help people understand history. If you just read history, to your point, it's obvious where this ends up. You know, what's interesting is like I said, I've got a lot of real estate in Colombia where I've got a team of people that manage these homes for me and these remodel projects. And a lot of them are from Venezuela. And they fled Venezuela because of the hyperinflation. And they get really, really emotional about my videos because of what I talk about, because of what they've experienced in their own lives. And when I get someone that's commenting, every once in a while I'll get this socialist, person or whatever that's commenting in one of my videos saying, "Oh, Venezuela is not that bad. It's just Fox News made them look bad, and it's actually, I went down, and they, the reporter for CNN goes to the grocery store and says, what? Look, there's cereal here, there's milk." I don't know if you guys saw that. And you show that to one of my employees, and you can see their face getting red. You can see the smoke start coming out of their ears. Because they've had so many family members that are dead as a result of central planning and the hyperinflation that it led to. And it's real. It's absolutely real. And it's real for them. And I tell you, if unfortunately, if we continue to go this direction, hopefully we don't have a hyperinflationary event because the dollar, we've got the benefit of being the world reserve currency. But at some point in time, all those dollars that we talked about earlier that are outside the United States, they got to come back, right? And you got all those currency units, all those trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars chasing a fewer amount of goods and services. Why do I say fewer? Because at that point in time, the goods that we're importing will be way too expensive for any of us to afford them because we're making dollars. Right? So if all those dollars are being inflated to toilet paper, we can't afford all the things that you buy at Walmart, all China. The stuff at Target, Home Depot, that's all imported from China or from other countries. Right? So we wouldn't be able to afford that. So then the next step is we'd have to make it here. But remember Triffin's paradox. We don't make anything here. We don't have the factories. That would take years and years and years to come online. And we'd have to reduce regulation to get there. So at some point, that's coming down the pipeline. It's just a matter of when. And if we go through deflation before that. Yes, sir?
How's the economy been affected now in Colombia with all the shutdowns, and what do you foresee coming here in the next year for Colombia?
Yeah, I mean, it's crushed the economy everywhere. I think it's crushed it to a slightly lesser degree because there's very little debt in the system. So what I mean by that, something we can all relate to, is just your home mortgage. So out of the people that own property in Medellin or in Colombia, which majority of them do, only 7% have a mortgage. So you got 93% that don't have a rent payment, they don't have a mortgage payment. So if they lose their job, really they just need rice and beans. It's not as catastrophic, and plus the culture there's so much different. I don't want to get off on another tangent, but the culture there is very family oriented. You see, it's very much just the father, the mother, the kids, the cousins. It's all about the family. See, here in the United States, what I've seen since the 1970s when I grew up is that the government and these people that I was just talking about, they're trying to take the focus away from the family and put it onto the government, to where you're not going to your family because you're in trouble. Well, if you have a problem, you're going directly to the government. The government is the source to everything that we need. And so they don't have as much of that mindset as we do here, unfortunately. So the economy is definitely taken a hit, but I think that it can hopefully bounce back a little faster than we can because there's less debt in the system, but we'll see.
Is the World Economic Forum, are they running on a timeline? Are they talking about any kind of a timeline?
Now, everything they say is, it might be there, I haven't read about it. Everything they say is just so broad and just generic, and you can't really pin them down. You've got to read like 4 or 5 different articles and try to like connect the dots to understand what their objectives and what these agendas actually are. So I would be surprised if they put a specific timeline on it, but it might be there, and I might have overlooked it.
Didn't they say January?
Well, that's for the, I believe that was for the Banking for All Act. We were talking about that at dinner, and in case you guys haven't heard about that, here in the United States in March, one of the politicians came out with something called the Banking for All Act. What is that? That's just a pretty fancy way of saying that all of us will have an account with the Federal Reserve. And that's the first step, just like we talked about,
by January,
of having
right?
a central bank digital currency, banning cash, and having just an app on your phone that goes straight to your bank account with the Fed, and them knowing every single transaction, and them being able to increase inflation. I'll get to your question in just a moment, but I want to point out that one downside there is if you've got the Fed app on your phone and they're sending you $2,000 a month in UBI, Universal Basic Income, let's call it stimulus check or whatever. If they need to get inflation higher to bail out the government, because the government's the biggest debtor of all time, so inflation benefits them, and it hurts us because we're the savers, right? We're the people who acted prudently. So it's a wealth transfer from the savers to the debtors, in this case being the government. But in order to get that inflation, they have to create velocity of money. So velocity of money is how fast $1 goes from this individual to this individual to this individual to that. So if it's just staying right here under someone's mattress, there's no velocity, right? So it's very difficult to get inflation there. You could imagine printing $1 quadrillion and just stuffing it under this stage wouldn't create inflation because it's not out in the system. But once you get that out there, then prices go. So my point is they give everyone this universal basic income with these Fed coins that goes to your app, but they say you can have the $2,000, but you have to spend it in 30 days. And if you don't spend it in 30 days, it's gone. It's no longer on your app. So all these people that go out there that now see government as mommy and daddy, they're the family, well, they're going to download that app so fast it'll make your head spin because they want the free money. And then they're going to go out there and spend, then drive prices higher, and that just crushes the savers. So I think that's another motivation they have. Also, negative interest rates. It allows them to have a lot more control. So I'm sorry, what was your question, sir?
My question is, isn't the control of currency presently being done in other countries like India and England, where they're outlawing the use of large bills?
Yeah, India did,
Isn't
yeah.
that the foundation of what you're talking about? Isn't that what's starting it, where you take away the hundreds and the 50s? It's like weaning them off of the money so you can control it with a computer.
Yeah, you're slowly boiling the frog.
That's exactly what I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
It's already being done in a bunch of countries because you can't carry large bills in a bunch of countries.
And one thing, that's a great point you just made. And I think we also need to be very cognizant and listening for the government telling us they're doing X, Y, Z for our safety or for our security. Right? That's always how they sell it to you. Yeah, we're taking away this personal liberty. We're going to ban cash. We're going to ban $100 notes. Why? Well, it's for your safety. The only people that use $100 bills are drug dealers, are terrorists, are all these people. And so that's how they sell it. And it's the people that grow up that are blue-pilled, if you will, that aren't cognizant of what's going on around them. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Great idea. Yeah, who wants cash anyway? It's inconvenient. I'd rather just have everything on my Fed app.
How about the chip in your hand?
Yep.
Well, I think that might come as a result of the vaccine. So I didn't even want to go down that rabbit hole, but I've had a lot of discussions. And you know, one thing I want to tell you guys, I travel a lot, and I talk to a lot of people. When I was in St. Bart's recently, I was hanging out with a lot of guys that are hedge fund managers. You know, these guys manage billions and billions of dollars. A lot of them you'd recognize from CNBC. And they mainstream guys that you see there, but then you get a couple beers in them. And listen, they throw on that tinfoil hat so fast to make your head spin. You know, and what they're very concerned with is that the government is going to come out and force you to be vaccinated. Right? And if you don't take the vaccine, then we're going to put you off in this little FEMA camp or something, or we're going to put you over here so you don't infect everyone. And again, why are they doing this? It's for your safety. It's for your security. And then all the people out there that don't understand what's going on, they're going to get pissed off at you for not taking the vaccine. They'll be like, Joe, what are you doing? Come on. Just get with the program, right? And then what they do is once you got a vaccine to know, then they put that chip in your arm, so every single time you go through the metal detector at the grocery store or at the restaurant or at the front of the hotel or whatever, the green light goes on that says that you've been vaccinated. You've got the chip in your arm or whatever, right? And if you don't have that chip, then the red light goes on. Then they throw you right back to where you belong. You know, so they don't let you on planes. They don't let you travel. So that's a conversation that I've had with a lot of, not just hedge fund managers, but a lot of people that you would see on TV as very mainstream as to what do you do? What do you do? I mean, what if you do if the government comes to you and says, listen, you've got two choices. Either you can continue to live a quote-unquote normal life, but if you do, you're going to have to take this vaccine, and you're going to have to get this chip in your arm. Or you're never allowed to travel again, and you have to live out in the woods like Grizzly Adams and never see your family. Seriously, what do you do? It's not an easy answer.
You go to war.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can create in a city, just take a few people that have some brains and put together and start doing our own economic trading and our own manufacturing and our own stuff? Just decide, like, guys, we're getting out of other places and we're getting together in this city. Please come if you have some brains, and we're gonna do this. Because I think in my mind it's like, okay, they can do all their things, but if we're congregated together and whatever they're doing doesn't affect us, because we're outside of the system, we're bartering, we're doing our own coin, we're doing our own stuff. Is there a way to, like, make this happen? Because reality is, I mean, if you do what works economically, it always works. It just doesn't matter what everybody else is doing.
You're right.
So in my mind, I'm like, well, okay, let's do what we should be doing, do what needs to happen. So I mean, I'm presenting that to you. How do we do that?
Well, the great news is that's worked very well in the past. I mean, you look at small ethnic groups that have done extremely well, not just in the United States, but in other countries that I've been to, that don't even speak the language. And they never look, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is Chinatown in San Francisco. You know, they just go out there and kick butt and make tons of money and educate their kids. And, you know, they save everything. And you go down to Chinatown and there's like a 6-block radius where they never speak English. It's all Mandarin and Cantonese. And those people that they don't even travel, you know, the government has no idea if they're trading with fish heads or Bitcoin or dollars. You know, they have no idea. But you see that, I mean, in Singapore, is the Indian population there. They have like little India. And it's the exact same thing there. So from a legal standpoint, I don't know how that would work because that's not my area of expertise. But they were telling me that Robert Barnes, a great buddy of mine, is coming up in a couple weeks. And he was Alex Jones's lawyer. He represented the Covington kids. And he is just the sharpest guy you'll ever meet. And he's not only a fantastic lawyer, but he knows legal history extremely well. So I would ask him how to set that up from a legal standpoint, and he'll be able to give you all the details if it is possible.
Want to join us? Once you figure it out.
We're all moving to Colombia.
Like, seriously.
Yeah. You know, that's a good point. So another thing that I've talked to money managers about is, okay, so what do you do as a fiduciary, right? What do you do to protect people's money? That's your job. And so what they're doing, a lot of them, they're looking at countries that don't benefit from these agendas. And I didn't get into it here, but one of their main agendas is green energy. Okay, and I'm not here to say that's good or bad or anything. But what I am here to say is that electricity is a less dense form of energy, and it would be the first time in human history that we've gone to a less dense form. Okay, so the only way that we could do that is if the standard of living decreased dramatically. And now, hopefully, technology will get there in the future. We're not there yet. But what the people need to realize that are pushing for green energy, and let's say that they're good intentioned, is they have to ask themselves how many petroleum products go into getting that solar panel on your roof. And when you look at how many petroleum, and this, again, it's not political, it is what it is. If you look at it, there's far more petroleum products that go into getting a solar panel on the roof than that house would actually use over the course of its life through natural gas or something like that. So, yeah. You have a question, sir? No? Okay.
Somebody mentioned timeline. I don't think they have a timeline, but I think they have a plan. And they're very adept at putting their plan in place when things happen like COVID.
Yeah.
Things happen so quick. There had to be some plan in place for that.
Yeah, if you read the World Economic Forum's website, like what I was talking about, you'll own nothing and be happy. That was actually 2016. So a lot of this stuff has been written there, and I think that they'd been thinking about it, and bam, COVID hits. Now, who knows? We'll just assume that was unintentional. They use it as, okay, this is great. One other thing I want to say about possible solutions is, number one, you guys are living in a great spot. I mean, thank goodness you live here and not in the middle of Chicago or in some urban area like that. That's I would want to pull the ripcord on that as fast as I could. But if you do have some flexibility in your travel, I would suggest considering some other countries that are maybe more developing. So why is that? Like Colombia, I would say 50% of the transactions are cash. So it would be very difficult for them to institute this type of agenda in a society that was based almost strictly on cash and no debt. Now, I'm not saying that it can't get there in the future, but it's going to take a lot longer for them to enact some sort of game plan where they ban cash. So, yes, ma'am?
Didn't they just do that in India within the last 2 years?
Well, they banned the higher notes, but they didn't ban cash.
Oh, they didn't?
Yeah, so they banned, if my memory is serving me correctly, it's like the 100 and the 50, but they still have the 20s and whatnot, yeah.
So if we have our investments in the bank and in the stock market, and you mentioned that Bitcoin, gold, and silver are the three real monies, should we be looking to them as our own reserve currency? And how do we use that within a system that's going digital?
Yeah, so it's complex. I think for the average person, the best thing that they can do is own a little bit of gold. Personally, I like 10% physical gold. And then I also like to have, the way I set up my portfolio is 10% gold, 80% things that pay me to own them, generally hard assets, commodities. There's some, I don't want to go too down the investment rabbit hole unless you guys want me to, but commodities are very cheap right now. So oil producers, they pay you to own them. Then 10% of my portfolio, like speculation, that would be Bitcoin. So I see asymmetry, but it's not necessarily paying me to own. That gets a little technical, but I think something everyone can do, aside from owning a little gold, owning a little Bitcoin, is just make sure that if you have a mortgage, it's 30-year fixed rate. See, or if you have a rental property, that you have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Why is that important? Because everything that we just talked about as far as these agendas will most likely create stagflation. So 1970s. So that's high structural unemployment, and you have consumer prices going up and up and up. Why? Because they're destroying these supply chains, and they're destroying the supply of goods and services. So if you have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, let's say that you buy a house today, and I'm going to take it to an extreme because it's a lot easier to understand. Let's say you buy a house today for $100,000, and let's just say you have a $100,000 mortgage on it, and your interest rate is 2%, and you fix it. So your monthly payment is $500, and it doesn't change. Or let's even say that you have no payments until year 10, and all of a sudden it's $100,000 or $120, whatever the interest is, balloon payment. Okay. Well, let's say we go through hyperinflation, and in 10 years, $100,000 will only buy you a loaf of bread. Okay. Well, your house that you have most likely will still buy the same amount of goods and services that it did when you bought it. But you'll be able to pay it back with the same money that you would have spent on a loaf of bread. You see, so the amount of goods and services that you could buy with your house compared to that one loaf of bread is a transfer of wealth. It's a transfer of purchasing power from the lender to the borrower. So you're actually making money by paying that debt back with cheaper dollars. It gets a little esoteric, but you got to just take it to an extreme, then it makes sense. If you got a rental property that's cash flow positive with 30-year fixed rate debt, now all of a sudden you're getting paid to go against the dollar. We call it short the dollar. So to bet against, or to bet that the dollar is actually going to depreciate in value. So I think owning a little gold, owning a little Bitcoin, making sure you got a 30-year fixed rate mortgage is what everyone can start by doing, and then just continue to educate yourself from there. Yes, sir.
I listened to a YouTube video today, and it was by somebody in Canada, and they said the left wing of Parliament up there is pushing for this, and they're going to have it one way or the other. And they said that you will own no property, all your debts will be forgiven.
Right.
And they're going to mandate everyone have the vaccine.
Yeah.
Now, I listened to the scientists that helped create the generator that goes into the vaccine, and there's a generator, and the only place they can put it in is your back of your right hand or in your forehead. You get into biblical studies, it's going to be the mark of the beast.
Right. Yeah.
So
it just gets more bizarre and more bizarre. What's interesting is when I say, I talk about these things on some of my videos, people, like one video I did the other day talks about how the stock market could go to zero, literally zero. And I just show the math. It's pretty simple. It's because of passive investing and passive index funds. But they say, oh, that could never happen. Oh, that's crazy. That's crazy. And I say, listen, let's go back to 2019. Let's go back 1 year. And if I would have told you the United States government would have shut down the entire country, and they wouldn't let you leave your house, and they'd force businesses to close, you would have said the exact same thing. And let's look at markets. Right? If I would have told you a year ago that oil, the price of oil, would go to negative $40 a barrel, which it did back in, April? The price of oil domestically in the United States went to negative $40 a barrel. You would have told me that I'm absolutely crazy. So when you're talking about stuff like this, yeah, it might seem a little extreme, but what life right now, a year ago, would have been extreme.
and they said it's coming to all the countries, including the U.S.
Yeah, so that's really the question is what do you do? I mean, if you're forced to make a decision as to whether or not to continue just living your life as normal as possible, but you got to get this chip in your forehead, or you have to live like Grizzly Adams. Again, I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. But why I want to bring this up is so we just start thinking about it. I'm not saying lose sleep over it. I'm not saying freak out. I'm saying just start thinking about it. So at least you got a plan B, and to the best of your ability, whatever plan B is.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Okay, not me, someone else.
Oh, okay.
We
Yes,
have the
sir.
room.
I was going to say that you mentioned before that we don't produce anything anymore from manufacturing. Is it possible for that to come back? Will something pay for that to come back? Or is it always going to be favoring multinationals going for the cheapest slave labor type situations like in China?
Yeah, so I was exaggerating. We do make some things, but if you look at our trade deficit, we consume far more than we produce, way more than we produce. So what would be required? It is possible. Unfortunately, what would be required is that we reduce regulation substantially. So why is that? Well, because you got to put yourself in the position of having $1 billion to set up a factory to create widgets, right? And look at what's happening in California. Let's just say the whole United States was like California. Would you really want to take your $1 billion to set up that factory that takes 10 years to build, that you can never ever move? There's no way. You're going to say, I'm out. There's no way I'm deploying that much capital. The only thing I'm going to do is set up some digital business that doesn't have a brick and mortar location. So we would have to, I mean, the short answer is if we could go back to the regulatory environment that we had in the 1930s, in the 1940s, I would say preferably in the late 1800s, then yes, we absolutely could. And it could happen fast, because if we went back, let's say we got rid of the income tax, and let's say that we had sound money. Most people don't realize, but we had 3% deflation per year from the late 1880s to, before we had the Fed, shocker. And so that means that we had very stable money. Your money was growing in purchasing power. So you think about if you're an entrepreneur in India or in Colombia, and you've got capital to deploy, and all of a sudden the United States just abolishes 99% of their regulation and banishes or abolishes the income tax, the corporate income tax, everything, takes it down to zero. You're like, woohoo! I mean, you're getting on the next plane to set up the widget manufacturing company in Texas or wherever. Again, my struggle is that would be totally politically unpalatable. So then it's the probability of that happening, I think, is very low, although it is possible. Yeah. And
I have just one more statement, George.
Yeah.
Before you go, could you talk about macroeconomics a little bit? Just enough, a couple paragraphs or sentences to introduce. But I was thinking about the great and abominable church. We usually think of a church as being that, but what is the greatest force that is demanding that you worship them and answer to them? It is government.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah,
I have a friend who theorizes that the mark of the beast isn't a chip. It could be as simple as a mask. You don't wear a mask, you don't buy, you don't sell.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're
that
kind of
goes
already
beyond just a little bit more into the cryptocurrency and your telephone. There's your beast.
Yeah.
You want to buy and sell, that's it.
Yeah, it's the account with the Fed. And if you look at what the government's trying to do, they're not only trying to get rid of the family, they're trying to get rid of religion.
Yeah.
So they're not just family, they're God.
Yeah. And they become a church.
Yeah. And if you look at that clip of Klaus, or you look at any of these people, and you listen to the way they talk, and you just say, it's just so obvious they have a God complex. And it's just, anyway, I'm sorry, I think, ma'am, you had a question back there?
Oh, I was just going to have it. Yes, I do have a question.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about personal debt and them coming in and calling mortgages, possibly like they did in the 1930s?
I don't know that they're going to, I doubt it, because what's happening right now is the Fed is basically buying all the mortgages. So what happens when you go to a bank and get a mortgage is before the ink's dry, they sell that mortgage to Fannie and Freddie, which is basically a government institution. And by the way, there's very few countries, if any, have, well, there's a couple, but very few countries have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. It's not a market-driven loan because no bank would give you money at a fixed rate for that long because they'd be worried about inflation. So before the ink's dry, unless it's a small community bank, then they're going to keep the loan on their books, but then you're not going to be able to get a 30-year fixed. So you go like Wells Fargo as an example, that's going to go straight to Fannie and Freddie. Fannie and Freddie take all these mortgages from across the United States. That's why it's called mortgage-backed sausages, because they just lump them together and grind them up, and then they sell it to Wall Street, and Wall Street, sells it to they try to dupe investors to buy these things. Well, what ends up happening is if the market crashes, they don't want those mortgage interest rates to go up because they know the housing market will crash. So then the Fed comes in and they buy all of the mortgage-backed securities from the banks or from the pension funds or from whatever. They call it quantitative easing. They don't just buy treasuries, they buy mortgage-backed securities. So my point is, if you have all these mortgages on the balance sheet of the Fed doesn't have a profit and loss. They print money. So if you don't pay back your mortgage, it doesn't really matter. So you see, I don't know I see the Fed having to buy more and more and more assets. And honestly, if we all have an account with the Fed, I see it potentially hollowing out the retail banking system. I mean, I think that the Fed might not only want to be the central bank, I think they might want to be the only bank. And so if you go to get your loan, your mortgage, let's say, well, why go to Wells Fargo? I'm just going to go to the Fed. And then you think that through to the next step. You think, okay, well, the Fed doesn't have a profit and loss, so they don't care if they take a haircut. So why would they base their decision-making process on your credit score? Why would they base it on your ability to pay them back? Well, they wouldn't have to. So what would they base it on? Well, maybe they base it on a social score, just like China's doing. So, oh, you're not wearing your mask? Your social score goes down. Too bad. You could have got that mortgage. Or maybe your interest rate goes up. You see, again, it's more central planning. And that's really at the core of all of this.
Thank you. I know we'd like to keep George here all night, but we're going to have to.
Sure. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.